this. Thanks, Dash.
Dean, I think I'd like to hire you as a light consultant for my new office.
I know.
This lighting in this room is just horrible. I'm going to have to engage somebody to create a studio in my office.
You live in a cave.
Well, Dean,
I'm not sure that'll help with the looks. I'm not sure it'll help with the looks, though.
I agree with Balaji. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's all about the lighting. I mean, Dean doesn't look half bad. I mean, you look pretty handsome with that lighting.
There's a lot of people say you've been living in the dark for some time, Brian.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. Oh, that's a mic drop, Chuck. That's a good one.
I love it. Hey, Dean, you should put that link to your article on LinkedIn on how to build the studio for Brian's sake, if nothing else, for sure.
Yeah.
So I know it's a couple of years old, but Brian's always a couple of years behind. So
yeah, because I am in the dark. That's exactly right.
Awesome. Well, hey, do we have any new folks on the call today? Raise your hand or just start chatting.
Gavin's back. I just want to point that out.
All right, Gavin. Good to see you, man. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Great to be back. Really nice to see everybody.
I like your haircut. It's kind of we're twins now.
Yeah, short back and sides.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's nice. It's looking good. Anybody else that's new?
Yeah, I'm actually new.
Yeah. Hey. Go for it.
Yeah, Keenan, I work with USA Jobs on a platform called Open Opportunities. It's like a professional development platform for federal employees.
Awesome. That sounds really, really cool. Well, welcome to the group. And then, Krish, I saw that you raised your hand too.
I did. Hello, everyone. I'm from Hardskills. I'm Shoba's co-founder. Very excited that she's talking today. I could only meet with one person, but I look forward to connecting with others later.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being here. Really, really excited. Well, I just kind of give you an update on everything that's been going on. Thanks to Barry, for the code leadership, Barry Matthews for the code leadership on the Coaches and Consultant OTPCP, which we wrapped the first round of coaches and consultant training over the last, I don't know, what was it, Barry, a couple months. We learned so much, and I think that the thing that, was a big takeaway for me, especially with really having the opportunity to work with SCI, Ryan Hick, just super grateful for those guys. But what I think what I learned, and Barry, I'd love for you to, talk just for a second about it as well. But, I think all of us in this room have been doing it long enough that we're kind of at the 303 level, right? The junior level, some graduate studies. And we keep forgetting that, we still need to be able to align around 101, right? Like this is still a long journey. And I also am really curious in my own mind is that, it's awesome to work with these large companies, that we like SEI. Can we really help them digitally transform themselves, or really is it better to focus on kind of smaller, and medium-sized organizations? I think one of the things that I'm really intrigued with is that I've been writing a lot because I'm working on this book for Jen and I are working on this book for Harvard. But I love this number where freelancer.com has this great research that Roland provided that 80% of the Fortune 500 companies have folks that are working on their platform. Yet in our conversations, only a couple dozen are enterprise level clients. And so there's this big gap between what's happening at the bottom up inside companies that's kind of below the radar, below compliance and IP, and yet not really understood from the C level. So still a big gap there, and really intrigued by that. So Barry, any thoughts?
I mean, it was a great learning exercise, wasn't it? It was, it was great fun to be part of, and I think we did gain a lot from it. We were, I totally agree, we were preaching to the choir to a certain extent because we had so much knowledge in the room, and it was great to have SEI involved. And in a way, it also was interesting to me that it sort of part of it turned into a client workshop as opposed to a training course for coaches and consultants. And that wasn't a bad thing. We all learned lots from it, and I hope SEI got a lot from it. But it meant we sort of deviated from what we designed it for, which was for coaches and consultants. And I also think the two, even putting the two together was quite difficult, because if you think of coaches as being internal champions, there's a sort of different message them as consultants, as external experts theoretically that are providing independent advice to companies. You probably want something slightly different for consultants than you would for coaches. So it's made me think there's so many different types of training we can deliver. As you know, I'm starting training for chief execs, and got our first training course in 2 weeks time for 12 chief execs on open talent and networked organizations. So, you know, what the message we're going to give to them is very different to the message we'd give to coaches or the message we'd give to people who are new. And you're right, we totally run the risk of assuming too much because we've been working in this industry for a while, because for those new to it, it can be very confusing. There's so many different platforms doing different things in different ways. But overall, I thought it was a great experience, and thank you to everybody who contributed. We've learned a lot from it, and we can hope to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I think it's really, thanks, Barry. I think it's really, to me, the biggest thing is just building a community and deeper relationships. So just love the way that it's happened. Hey, Diane or Steve or Balaji or Brian or anybody else that's on the call that experienced it, any feedback and thoughts for the group?
I was just super, thank you, John, and thank you, Barry, for putting it together. I think all of the contributions were fascinating, and what was really interesting to me, kind of something that I really was thinking about actually the other day, was the willingness of SEI to experiment, right? I mean, it's so often, I've worked with enterprises for so long, and they always talk the talk, but they don't ever walk the walk. And it seemed like SEI was very, very motivated to leverage these new work streams and do something different, which was really exciting to be a part of. I think the training obviously has a great future, and I'm certainly excited to, do something with it again.
Appreciate that. Anybody else? Diane or Steve?
Yeah, I would just echo Barry's thoughts, Brian's thoughts. I thought it was really a brilliant experience, and it just packed with learning, both for the intended kind of audience of the training curriculum, but also for the community to understand. I think we all learned better how we can kind of tune our messaging and the value that we can bring to the table to better help clients and stakeholder communities within the client organizations. Because as we all know, it's just not, these methodologies and resources are not one size fits all. It's not one playbook fits all. You have to understand the context and the objectives of the organization and be able to kind of mold the resource models and strategies in a way that drives the best possible outcome. And that's a human experience. And you have to kind of get in there and listen and learn and partner in order to make that work. So great experience. Can't wait for what's next.
That's great. Hey, Steve, any thoughts? I know you're.
What everyone said is exactly right on. It really brought into laser focus several key kind of issues around this. And I just have to say, some of the products that came out of this that Balaji and Barry and others put together really helped to make things that were kind of fuzzy to a lot of people clear. So I think there was some really great stuff that came out of this.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hey, speaking of, Steve, I know you're always a huge fan of upskilling, and that's part of, I think that's a lot of when I hear you tell stories about, how things are going at NASA, it's always the magical stories of somebody took the initiative to upskill and, really turned on their career. And so Mark Hanot's here, and Mark, I want to, just let the group know how grateful I am for you and the education committee, Mark and his team at the Gen, to really put a lot of sweat equity and effort into creating the playbook, which is actually, I'm just diving in, Mark, I'm just diving into the mindset chapter right now, and man, it's so great to have a little schedule to be able, or at least a framework to be able to create. So thanks again for all the hard work. But I know you have Shoba here that from Hardskills, and I thought I'd let you do the intro, and I think that this could be a really fruitful conversation of the knowledge gap, right? If we have this gap between the bottom up and the top down, how do we help people overcome this kind of 101, the ability to understand what this is and how it works at a very at a very basic level to start the journey of learning instead of trying to jump into the deep end without the tools to understand, how we build this new kind of model. So Mark, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, John. Can you all hear me? It's monsoon time in Mumbai, and the rains have literally just started as we began. So if you hear rain behind me, that's the reason. But I hope you can hear me. I'm really delighted that we've been able to get Shoba here. I think she's currently on the east coast of the US, but she lives in Berlin. She and I met 10 years ago when we both lived in India. She's truly a global citizen who's lived in of those regions. She's somebody who's very at ease in both developed and developing markets. And I think that global mindset is reflected in the way that she and her co-founders, Anthony and Krish, think about how people learn. Most behavioral skills training tends to have a very US-centric approach, tries to sort of make one size fit for all. And one of the things that I've always loved about Hardskills is the way that its content is really tailored to a global marketplace. So learners see people who look and sound like them. And I think that's a great USP, particularly as we see large enterprises with more and more people in Asia. And Asia is a big place, as you know. It's home to more than half the world's population. It's far from homogenous. So that ability to appeal to its diverse populations, I think, is very powerful. So a couple of things I thought I'd just say in way of introduction. Firstly, as an entrepreneur and a founder, Shoba is super impressive. She's been an inspiration to me over the past decade. And I know from conversations over the years, amused to many others on that crazy journey that is an entrepreneur's life. And secondly, I think her perspective is really relevant to our community. We frequently come back to discussions about the skills agenda and skills gap. And increasingly, we're talking about credentialing, which I think is a growing area of interest. And as we've heard over the last month or so, an area that's ripe for investment. And I don't think that we've had among us anybody that really represents a contemporary and disruptive view of workplace learning. So I'm really delighted that you've been able to join us, Shoba, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, John, and everyone else on the team. And I have attended about half a dozen of these sessions over the past year, and so I have met some of you before, but it's always good to expand the network. And I'm coming to you today, as Mark said, from New York. So I actually, before I have a few slides to share to give us some framework. But my breakout was with Gavin McFlaherty, who is in Scotland. And, in the intro, it was great because I asked him what he did. And he said he's an innovation consultant for the oil and gas industry. And I said, oh, that must be a lot of fun. It must be really hard. And he said, oh, yes. And I said, what's hard about it? And he said, well, because, frankly, every solution that needs to be every problem has a solution that's been found or that's been discovered somewhere in the world. But the real problem is really getting the people to change their hearts and minds, right? And so that was a great segue to kind of giving the context for why, although we are called hard skills, which a lot of times people think is technical skills or coding, it's really about the hardest skills of all, which is the hearts and minds, right? How do we change behaviors? So that's going to be the focus today. And I put together some slides on the industry. Let me just try and get this. So you can. Can't seem to shift this. Hang on a sec. I'm trying to get it into presentation mode, but
You sometimes show, but it's not actually the interpersonal, it's the technology that confounds you.
I know. Hang on. Okay. How's this? So Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I just want to talk about these three things and then really open it up to a dialogue, right? So the first thing is on the behavioral skills side, I want to just talk about what the last 15, if you go back 15 years when skills became a lot more dominant, what we have seen is really the wave for technical skilling, because that was the need, and that we weren't seeing a lot of new talent coming in with the kind of skills that companies needed. But today, what we have really is, particularly over the last 5 years, many of the largest enterprises have skilled a huge footprint of their workforce in the functional and domain technical digital skills that they need. And you've got new talent coming in from markets like India, Brazil, Poland, who are coming with the kind of skills that the market needs. So the shift is moving for a number of reasons from these domain and functional capabilities to the cognitive and behavioral, right? So part of the reason it's shifting is because you already have a baseline now that's a critical mass. Maybe it's not a full critical mass, but it's kind of getting there. But the other reason also is the whole automation and digital transformation, where the technology is not the challenge anymore, but it's getting people to add more value. And I think if you look at the open talent economy, a lot of the roles that people have filled are really value-adding roles, right? And so I think this is going to become a bigger focus with the open talent economy, and skills such as critical thinking, how to solve problems, how to have an agile mindset, and then the biggest one of all really is how to collaborate, right? And that's a big challenge. So fast forward to today, this, we've all seen 100 different permutations of this. This is LinkedIn's latest workplace learning report. And what you'll see from that is 9 out of 10 behaviors, 9 out of the 10 skills are behavioral, right? So what does this mean in terms of how learning budgets? I want to touch a little bit on the corporate side and then extrapolate to what we can expect for the open talent economy. So learning budgets were hit last year, but they were on a trajectory, and now they're growing. They're picking up very nicely again, and there's probably likely to be a little bit of revenge shopping here as well as we come out of the pandemic and move into 2022. But even before that, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I think IBM did a landmark study which really showed the shift was happening with corporate budgets. So how much do companies spend? If you take someone like a PwC, I think their training budget is really very, very significant. It's in the hundreds of millions. If you take someone like a SAP, which has about 115,000 employees, their training budget is $142 million, right? So roughly in the developed economies, a rule of thumb is on a per head basis, the spend is about between $1,200 to $1,500 per year per employee. So that's kind of, real money at the top of the funnel. And this is also, McKinsey, of course, covers a lot of this. And, people are calling it different things: power skills, human skills, social and emotional skills, but they're all under the umbrella of behavioral and cognitive skills. So how big is this market? I gave you some numbers in terms of individual company spend. And the spend on behavioral and cognitive skills globally now is somewhere between $45 and $50 billion a year. Right? And this is these are numbers of the number of white-collar professionals, excluding China, right? So 450, almost 460 million based on the International Labor Organization. So that's just some background stats to set the stage. And then really, these are the kinds of companies that we work with. So you'll see there are some brands that many of you recognize, and then some smaller niche brands in manufacturing and in a lot of companies that are re-engineering themselves, right, from one industry to another. Collectively, they hire about 1.5 million people. We're just touching the surface of this. And what I'm trying to do for the rest of my conversation here is to dissect and see what are the lessons we can learn that could be instructive for the open talent economy, right, from these, because many of these companies, certainly, companies like Tata, HCL are going to be recruiting even more or relying even more from the open talent pool. But what is most interesting is, in many ways, these companies are a constellation of lots of individual open talent networks, right? Because what happened with the even pre-pandemic, because they have employees on site, and what happened with the pandemic is all the companies that have shifted people to indefinitely work from home effectively are a collection of independent agents, right? So there are three challenges that we're seeing these customers really concerned about. Number one, how to connect these distributed teams with a unifying language, right, on a day-to-day operating behaviors and values, because they're hiring people they're never going to meet, and it is different. It is efficient in many ways, but how do you connect people? And it's not, it's more than just collaboration. How do they put a united front with the customer? So that's one big issue. The second issue, which is related to this, is the whole focus around trust and being communicative. So it's more than just communication skills. It's really, when you're working in isolation, how do you keep alive the instinct to be communicative, right? And that nicely leads into the whole collaborative, the need for collaboration, which transcends from everything to project management right through to innovation, right? So these are issues that go beyond skills, but they are particularly challenging when you're trying to get everybody on the same page, and when your recruitment or your resourcing policy now is going to have that added layer of an open talent pool. We're talking to some companies here in the US who have more than 100,000 employees, and they're describing scenarios where they don't even have a bench anymore. They're getting hired for projects, and they are configuring instant pop-up teams where people literally have no history of having worked with each other, right? So how do they know communication styles, prioritization styles, and all kinds of other day-to-day skills? Then the third aspect really is one that interests me the most in this conundrum, which is who's responsible for skilling? Because historically, skilling was a perk, a nice to have, and obviously a sliver. A company did it because they really needed to get people skilled, but it's been a company responsibility. However, if we are moving to a more distributed and devolved workforce, then whose responsibility is it going to be, right? And if you think about the open talent economy, you now have a layer of the agencies in the middle. What is the role they play in? And clients want to know who they're getting, and then that leads us into the whole credentialing issue. So, which is really the toughest problem. And I think, we've been working on this for 5 years, just the taxonomy and the credentialing component. And it's a work in progress is the most positive way to describe it. Because when you think about technical skills, coding skills, or machine learning skills, it's fairly straightforward to assess, right? And there are standard measurement systems. But when it comes to behavioral skills, critical thinking, a lot of it is in the eyes of the beholder. And there's a lot that is really nebulous. It's hard to define, and it's very, very hard to measure. The other aspect, which is particularly complex, is if you take what, I was talking with Gavin about, which is problem-solving skills or innovation. That's not just one little plug of, knowing C++ or Ruby on Rails, right? It's actually an amalgamation of multiple subsets of skills. So the creating credentialing that's meaningful and transparent and a true taxonomy for behavioral skills, it's a lot more complex because you really kind of need to dig deep. And I want to use an example of thinking critically, right? It's number 1, 2, or 3 on every corporate list of skills they need their people to demonstrate. But it's lip service, really. Most people don't even know what they mean by that. Town hall after town hall, survey, employee engagement, blah, 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 thinking critically, right? But if you break that down, and I've just done a 5-minute deconstruction, you've got to be a good listener, and that's picking up signals, verbal and nonverbal. You've got to know how to ask the right questions, how to time those questions. You've got to understand the process behind critical thinking. And then you've got all these other things, right? Because critical thinking is partly developed by gut, partly it's a methodology. You have to know when to apply, when you can rely on your gut and when you need something more, or how to arrive at a judgment that's fair and balanced, and how to present your case, right? And then influencing and all of these other things. So it is very complex. And so, one of the things that one of the conclusions that we arrived at, we're entrepreneurs who did not come from academia or training. We looked at this opportunity as a white space to find a solution. We very quickly arrived at the conclusion that for behavioral skills, you really need to package, you need to think about the outcome you want, and then you need to package it. So if you apply that to the open talent economy, and you're an individual or you're an agency that is serving up individuals, I think you really do need to think about a package of skills. We package all our products into skills that are outcome driven. So if you want to deliver, if you want to get change in your workforce, we have configured based on science, based on a lot of other input, 10 skill areas, but inside this are literally dozens of subsets, right? And on the taxonomy, there is no shortcut. We've been working with with some of the world's top cognitive scientists to try to really get granular. We're doing some original research in this area. A lot of it is iterative and trial and error. We're testing and measuring multiple ways. A baseline open text responses where we're able to use AI to derive certain mindset hints. But the bottom line really is it's understanding their interrelationship and getting really granular is what's key. And there's a lot of heavy lifting ahead. So that's the background. And now I'm very happy and keen to take questions from everyone and have a dialogue and have your perspective. I know this is not a group that's shy of sharing viewpoints.
Can I kick off? Can I kick off with a question then, Shoba? You
Sure.
talk about this sort of shift from technical to behavioral.
Yeah.
Are you actually seeing that manifest in terms of budgetary changes, or is it just is it more are people walking the talk on that?
Well, I would say it's probably somewhere around 80% of the people. It's lip speak. but that was probably 90% pre-pandemic, right? So the great thing is that, you know, we've all heard that adage, right? If people don't leave a company, they leave a manager, right? And when you dig deep into that, it is typically behavioral skills. So we are seeing, I think, you know, we grew our customer base 4x last year as a result of companies needing to address this issue. Everything from how do you train employees so they can have work-life balance, because, you know, offering a coaching app or someone to talk to you at the other end when you're stressed, and mindfulness is all prescriptive, it's not preventative, right? So training is the only real preventative solution. So, and a lot of what is exciting, and I think, John, you alluded to it a little bit on the whole, you know, we spend so much time with these big companies, but maybe we should look at the smaller companies. The most exciting thing is many SMEs who never paid attention to formalized training are now really embracing formalized training, because that's the difference between them becoming professional. And it's also because, you know, there are no geographic barriers, and there's also very little in the way of vertical barriers for industries, right? So your competitors can come from an entirely different industry, as Elon Musk has showed, the auto sector. So I think we are seeing a shift, not nearly as fast as we would like.
Go ahead, San.
Hey, Steve, you had some great comments here in the chat. Any questions that you have?
Well, I mean, this is really fantastic. I love the fact that you're actually putting real training and real, you know, measurement behind what is, like you say, the most requested skills out there. What's interesting is these are the skills that are going to be necessary to actually utilize open talent and adapt it to the enterprise. So the most valuable part's either going to be in that consulting piece for us, at least, or within organizations. But I also can see how having these skills within the freelance community will be valuable as well, to be able to bring extra to bear on certain projects where you're bringing in that critical thinking, you're bringing in that kind of expertise. And so I mean, all the way around, I think this is fascinating. I could just see, you know, Freelancer or Upwork or these platforms starting to offer these kind of offerings, and then having a taxonomy and a certification that starts to highlight that as being a super valuable resource on the development platform. So, you know, I'm a big fan of upskilling. I think it's what's going to save the world, or not if we don't get there fast enough. So this is fantastic. So thanks for all you're doing there, Shoba.
Yeah, I think the point about freelancers, I'm just seeing some of the comments, can lead the way. I think the area where the freelance economy will lead the way is in the credentialing, right? Because one of the big challenges in enterprise training is that enterprises, out of, you know, being overwhelmed, having too much going on, being lazy, all of the above, have jumped at the whole online learning revolution and said, hey guys, guess what? You have access to 50,000 courses on LinkedIn Learning and another 30,000 on Udemy. And guess what? We're now throwing in Pluralsight with another 40,000, right? And that kind of playlist approach, each one do your own, hasn't worked phenomenally. And if you dig deep, the only time people actually complete is when it's going to improve their job prospects, and they absolutely have to have a particular skill to get that promotion or paid. And I think what we are going to see with the behavioral skills in the open talent economy is to differentiate and to command the highest rates and the best gigs. People are going to differentiate themselves in this way, because it is a truism that today, when someone doesn't hire you or you don't get that gig, it's rarely because you don't have the technical skills. It's because someone has determined you didn't show enough of an open mind, or your presentation or your communication skills or your team leadership skills weren't quite there. So I think that's where we're going to see the competition from the open talent economy forcing salaried wage earners to kind of up their game.
Yeah, I think that's great, Shoba. And I was really interesting because when you and Steve were having that dialogue, I met with Vicoland. Steve, I think I connected you with those guys. This idea that they're creating software to self-aggregate teams. So going from individual contributors as freelancers to teams. And I think that skill is even more important. How do they aggregate teams if software is doing that? Then how do you create those skills that you need to make sure that you effectively lead teams and are part of teams? Hey, San, you and I come from the same background, and I know I love your ideas in the comments on, these are for us in the marketing and creative space, right? These are really technical skills, right? Like you can't be a creative without good communication skills. And a lot of times the failure of creative is not because they don't have great creative skills, but because they can't communicate their creativity. So I think you had a question, and I'd love for you to participate.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of reacted to that. I was thinking, hi Shoba, how are you? Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I was sort of thinking about that, and it's sort of, I was thinking about that bias in a way. It's interesting, but I was also reflecting, on the anecdote at the beginning around, this notion of there's lots of innovation out there. I've built a platform for grassroots innovation. There's lots of innovation out there. There's lots of capital to invest in it. There's a scarcity in terms of market and kind of consumer acceptance of a lot of the changes that we're going to need to go through as a societies and populations around the world. And it made me think, and Shoba, I'd love to get your perspective on this. When I look at the open talent space, I see a lot of focus on what I'll call kind of building jobs, right? A lot of focus on technology, coding stuff. It makes sense, and I wonder if, to your point, it's because it's measurable and things like that. What I don't see is a lot of focus on market shaping, on market making. And if we think about an economy that's moving in the direction that it is, how do we sort of like break what I regard as a bias of saying, oh, these are soft or these are behavioral skills versus technical skills. I regard that as a bias. I think there's a few people in this community that also think that too. For us, they're the hard skills. They're the basics of our profession. What's your perspective on that, first of all? Are we just following trends, or how do we get in front of it? And yeah, just love to hear your thoughts.
You're muted.
Yeah, from some extent, I think we're moving from following trends to actually being able to get ahead of it, right? And I think I am not entirely sure that we're going to be in any near term getting to a point where we're going to see less of a demarcation. I think that's how people have always thought. If you look at the school system, it's taken centuries, really, decades at least, for and you still think about liberal arts, right? And so I think these are segmentations that are too deeply ingrained to go away in a hurry. But I think, just off the top of my head, my gut tells me we're a generation away from that, right? So I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question, but yeah.
I actually I wanted to jump in. San, would you like to clarify, or is it okay? Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Okay. So this is so interesting. Thank you so much, Shoba. Amazing and great discussion. What's interesting is who owns the responsibility for reskilling? Is it the enterprise? Is it the worker? And I think you also mentioned the agency. And in the world of open talent, I can tell you, I hail from life sciences. And in life sciences, especially in the last year or so, there have been massive changes in industry. So for one, we have moved from an extremely regulated system of like testing clinical trials in person to having to do remote. And nobody in this space actually has experience here. And I feel like, of course, that's due to the pandemic, but I also think that's emblematic of the pace of business. I think every single industry and vertical is experiencing disruption on a scale that would have been unimaginable 20, 30, 40 years ago. So the idea of centralized control of skill development, I think, is actually an anachronism. And I wonder, I love what you were saying about credentialing. And I also love that you're moving towards, or what you were sharing about today was moving towards cognitive skills. And of course, those are, you know, incredibly important. But what I haven't heard is, where is the centralized control or a centralized assessment, if you will, of skills that are developed outside of centralized control? And by control, I mean centralized determination of what skills are necessary and centralized dissemination of those skills. Because that's the whole thing with the open talent, is open talent, we are, you know, on the front lines. It's like the Wild West. We're trying to figure out what the skills are that we actually need to survive. And I think that the enterprise is actually behind those front lines in some ways. And I'm just wondering, how do we reconcile that?
Well, I think the devolution of power, right? And even those who aren't moving to take true control of their destiny, i.e. they're not moving to the open talent network for whatever reason, but they're still tethered to an enterprise. I think even in that community, probably in the next 5 years, we'll see increasing individual responsibility, because, you know, there is a decoupling, right? If I want flexibility to decide whether I'm coming to the office 2 days or 5 days, then I likely have to take responsibility for a whole host of other things. So I do think that shift will happen. And that's why I think the open talent economy will drive that shift, right? Because if you have a growing pool, if you've got 150 million people taking responsibility and being accountable for being relevant and all of that. And if you think about the psychology of who opts today, who is opting into the open talent economy? I am willing to bet, if we did a psychometric analysis of this, it's the people who are confident of themselves and their future and are willing to take that risk, right? So these are typically the most motivated people and the people who are lifelong learners, right? So I think, you know, it'll be interesting to watch.
Thanks, Shoba. I know Andy and Chuck, you have some, you know, you've had your hand raised for a while. So Andy, why don't you jump in? I know we've got like 5 minutes left. Thanks for being patient.
No, thanks, John. I'll be quick. The question I had was around this. In your slide deck, you had something like post training monitoring. I'm kind of curious in the long run regarding, you know, this shift, if we were to say, towards open talent, whether this monitoring and this capability for an organization to know whether training is being adopted and used in the behavior of the individual long term can be standardized between what they're doing versus what the open talent made. Because if you're doing different metrics and you're kind of mixing people, my concern is that everyone's looking at things differently. And you even mentioned before at the very beginning that measurements are very subjective. So I'm curious your thoughts on how you could see a world where we're speaking the same language, right? Because I could see a company just being, if they adopt open talent, 60, 70, 80% of their workforce is speaking by different, metrics than they are internally. They may just give up on measuring it internally.
Yes, that is where they are starting from, actually giving up on measuring. That's the baseline today, because it's just too difficult, it's too impossible. But it is possible. It is difficult, but it is possible. And I think like all successful innovation projects, what's the criteria? You start with a team, right? So I think starting within organizations with a business unit, figuring out, okay, everyone in the CIO's office needs to have problem-solving skills and influencing skills, because that's really important, right? They're trying to bring a whole machine with them. And perhaps for, the finance team, it's a different set of skills, right? It's detail, being oriented towards detail or whatever. So I think that will be, you'll have to bite off chunks and address it. And standardization, nothing is standardized at the end of the day, right? We've all got kind of tweaks and interpretations. So I think we can get there. I think really we are 5 years away before there's a semblance of consistency. That's what we're spending a lot of time on, trying to figure that out. And we're taking it from a vertical strategy in industries, as well as company size, because I think that's also an influencer, whether you're a company with 1,000 people or 100,000. And I think, Chuck, you had your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, Chuck.
Oh, we got minutes left, so I want to keep you on time. I'll just say that as a person who helped develop IBM's leadership development program, I know that leadership is tough. I posted an article in there talking about leadership is the #1 requested skill for 2021. Yeah. But I see leadership as slow cooking, like it takes a little bit of time. Now, how are we ever going to get that done? Where are we going to get the leaders that we need to teach and learn about leadership, and how is leadership going to be going? Maybe it's even the culmination of all of the hard skills. How are we going to find that group?
Correct, because, and so it is time, it takes time, and there are ways to accelerate it. But the equally important thing, Chuck, is that, the old style of leadership and behavioral training was this mindset of competency based. Only if you're a team lead do you need to do that. But today you are a solo flyer and you're having to make decisions, right? So you need a lot of the leadership skills. So it's really the scale. And so it is a very different, you can't, if you're 115,000 people, you can't just rely on training 5,000 or 10,000. You kind of need to cross a critical mass of at least 100,000, right? So I think that's the first step.
Yeah, everybody needs to lead, but not everyone is.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end, I think. Thanks, Chuck. As always, you're really insightful. Hey, I really want to thank you, Shoba, for showing up today and taking us through this. And this is something that, has been critical. And I shot you a note, I think, on direct message just to make sure that you and I connect, because I want to definitely include the upskilling. I'm trying to figure out a way in the book to do that. So, lots of conversations to have. And especially grateful to you, Mark, for bringing Shoba into the community and really, really awesome. So thanks, guys, for being here. As always, just love you guys so much and love this journey. I think, the more, as Barry said really well to begin with, the more we peel back the layers at the end, the more complex this whole thing gets. It's it's not just something that's going to happen overnight. Even though we were 20 years in the making, this is a generational change. So I love the fact that you guys show up on a weekly basis and we're part of this conversation, because it's going to take all of us to figure this out and many, many more. So anyway, have a great weekend. Enjoy your time off and look forward to catching up with the next conversation.
Thanks, everyone, for showing up. Bye.
Thanks. Ciao.
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Sarah, I just
Thank you, guys. Great stuff.
Bye. Hi.